Today, on the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, we're going to be focusing on if 4% is FIRE friendly. If you're not familiar, FIRE stands for Financial Independence Retire Early, and those involved in the movement are impressively passionate when it comes to personal finance. The story at the start of the podcast is going to be reviewing what would you do if you didn't have to make money for a living. I'm going to share with you what I would do if I didn't have to make money to make ends meet. Our budget tip is going to be to track your net worth annually. And our question of the day is really not a question again, it's going to be an answer to something I saw happen in the comments section. I saw the claim that in order to have a happy life, you shouldn't be married. And I have some things to say about that. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled financial coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. The book, Your Life or Your Money, popularized the question, what would you do if you didn't have to work to make money in order to live? If you just simply didn't have to work, what would you do with your time right now? If the answer to the question is what you're already doing for your career, well, congratulations, you're already living the dream that a good majority of the FIRE community is pursuing. If you would rather be doing something different than the career that you have, thinking about this question might make you wonder, how can I go from where I am, where I don't want to be, to the goal of doing the work that I want to do, not because I have to, but because it's my dream and my passion. If I didn't have to work to make money, my number one priority would immediately become spending more time with my family. Amanda and I plan on homeschooling our children, so a big part of my dream, if I didn't have to work to make money, would be to engage equally with her in educating our children. Additionally, I would really like to keep doing this podcast and keep up the financial coaching stuff. I would love to help all of you listening achieve your hope-filled financial future through this podcast, through the HopeFilled Financial Ministry. I would also really love to help couples, to help marriages not only survive, but thrive by just changing the way that they think about money. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this is a driving question for the FIRE community. The FIRE community wants to become financially independent. Now, that's not necessarily so they can retire and do nothing. I don't know too many people who don't plan on doing anything with the rest of their lives. If you become financially independent, you don't have to worry about earning money for a living. You simply live and pursue the dreams. I think one of the most valuable lessons we can learn from the FIRE community is how to pursue the dream of doing the work that we want to do and making that goal, making that career, making that world a reality, and doing so before we turn 60, 70, or 80 years old. Doing our best to start living that dream today. Keep that in mind for when we get to the main topic, but first, we need to cover today's budget tip. Our budget tip today is to track your net worth annually. If you add up all of your liquid assets, then all the equity you have, be it in your home or vehicles, you can figure out how much your net worth is. And if you plot that out year over year, you should be able to see that grow along with your nest egg and your plan to build wealth and your plan to become financially independent. Now, you might not see your net worth go up every year if you make some significant purchases in a given year, but the overall trend should be upward if you have a healthy savings rate. Knowing where your net worth stands can be a very powerful motivator for you as you pursue increasing your savings rate. Knowing your net worth can help you become more frugal. And an annual check-in on your net worth can help you know if you're on track for your goals. If you have a particular goal to be financially independent by a particular point and you know the number that you need to hit in your net worth to be financially independent, well, tracking your net worth makes that goal measurable and helps you know when you're going to hit it if you stay on pace. And if you want to hit your financial independence goal sooner, well, you can see that you're falling behind on that pace and you can ask yourself, what can I do to build my savings rate, to build my net worth faster? Now it's time not to answer the listener question, but to respond to something I saw in the comments. If you've been following the HopeFilled Financial Podcast for a while, you know I have a strong passion for helping marriages for helping struggling marriages survive and good marriages thrive, and doing so by providing healthy financial decisions that promote healthy marriages, that statistically reduce the risk of money fights and money problems, reduce the risk of separation, and increase the odds of happiness. On one of the breakout videos that I posted on YouTube covering the marriage and money topic, Boost Junkie 27 said, "No wife equals happy life." That's what they said. And I felt compelled to respond a little bit because I think this is misleading and I didn't want someone to take that for granted. I know some people are called to singleness and I know some people are called to marriage, but I don't think that anyone or everyone in particular should deny themselves the option of marrying just because they think that marriage leads to unhappiness, because that's simply not true. As an answer to my response, Boost Junkie 27 said that 50% of marriages fail, 50% succeed. And if 50% of airplanes were to crash, would you ever get on an airplane? And that's the main argument I want to focus on right now. My response in the comments expanded on the analogy there with the airplane, saying, well, imagine you had an airline that made healthy decisions, that did everything right in order to reduce risk for the passengers on the plane. They had a 99.99% success rate when it came to their flights. There was almost no risk of ending up in an airplane crash that would cause injury or death. Now, in this analogy, imagine there are a whole bunch of other airlines that are not making healthy decisions and are not mitigating risk on a healthy level. And they make up the majority of the airlines out there. And if you average all airplanes and all the flights, well, sure, 50-50. 50% of them are going to fail and result in injury. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't fly on the safe airline that has done their due diligence. In this analogy, the average success rate for all airplane flights does not discredit or expose you to undue risk if you fly on the safe airline. Similarly, in marriage, if you make appropriate risk-reducing decisions together, decisions that anyone in any marriage can make, you can reduce your risks of separation, money fights, money problems, whatever it is that you're concerned about, to virtually zero. And that's really important to know. If you are called to marriage, I don't want you to feel discouraged about marriage because of a political climate or what your friends are telling you about the culture these days and whether marriage is fair or whether or not marriage leads to joy or not. You can't let other people define what brings you joy. You can't let other people define your why, your drive, your vocation. Now, in my pursuit to help those who are married do better with money and their marriage, I have the workshop, Your Marriage, God's Word, and Money. My workshop is available online on my website, HopeFilledFinancial.com, and it's currently designed to be hosted at a local church. So a church can go onto the website and purchase the workshop and host it themselves, or hire me to come out and facilitate the workshop in person. In that workshop, I share kernels of truth and wisdom that can help all marriages on the money front. For example, if you have a joint account, you are 5 times less likely to think about separating with your spouse due to money fights and money problems. If you manage money completely separately, there was a study done by, I believe, Policy Genius that said about 20% of those couples are on the rocks because of money specifically. But the couples who have a joint account, only 4% were really worried about money. And we got to take this seriously, because thinking that your spouse spends foolishly, either too much or too little, like you think they're a tightwad, that is the number one statistical indicator that you have a future failure in your marriage. So by just joining accounts, if you have them separately, cuts your risk by 1/5. Next, if you run a monthly budget together, you're very likely to be talking about money in a healthy way at least once a week, not arguing, but discussing money. And the couples who discuss money weekly in a healthy way, according to Ramsey Solutions, are 80% likely to report being in a happy marriage. Next, debt can double the odds that you end up having financial stress that puts a strain on your marriage and results in financial arguments. So if you get out of debt, you cut your risk of money problems being an issue in your marriage in half. Lastly, if you're a faithful believer, if you're religious, praying together with your spouse every day is the most powerful way that you can reduce risk in your marriage. There was a study done by a Catholic priest, I believe it was called Faithful Attraction, And in that study, they had a big social survey of a bunch of different couples, and what they found was those who prayed together, only 0.01% of them ended up getting a separation, which means that if you pray together every day with your spouse, your risk of divorce is non-existent. And if you follow the money wisdom that I shared just prior to that tip, well, your odds of having financial strain in your marriage are almost none. And knowing those statistics, knowing that those choices are ones that I could make with my spouse, with my wife, well, that makes me feel very comfortable getting on that airplane of marriage every time. Okay, time for today's main topic. As mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And more than that, it represents a community of people who are very passionate about personal finance. It represents a community of people who are probably hearing this podcast today. Some of you out there may very well be pursuing FIRE. And if you are, I very, very strongly admire your passion for achieving financial independence. The zeal and drive and care that you have to pursue your dream for what you would do if you didn't have to make money for a living is inspiring, to say the least. Now, with any growing movement that is gaining traction and becoming increasingly more prevalent in society, there are its critics. A couple of these critics include Dave Ramsey and George Kamel. George, in particular, he works for Dave as a Ramsey personality. He posted a video just yesterday from when I'm recording this on the 5th of October. It was the 4th of October. He had a video out there that kind of shared what his problems were with the FIRE movement, and I'd love to make it a part of this particular episode, but I've got a bigger plan for some of what he said in there because it relates back to the episode where I covered Dave Ramsey's most dangerous advice on retirement safe withdrawal rates. Subscribe if you don't want to miss how that episode gets integrated into my part 2, where I respond to Dave and where I might actually confront Dave directly on the Dave Ramsey Show. I digress. We're going to have to table a reaction to George's video until a future episode. Again, like, follow, share, subscribe if you don't want to miss it. But he made a point that the 4% rule may not be sufficient if you're going to retire super early. And I know that the 4% rule is fairly prevalent in the FIRE community. I watched a movie with my wife not too terribly long ago. It was called Playing with Fire, the documentary, and it was about a couple who wanted to pursue FIRE. They wanted to cut their expenses down as much as possible, save upward of 50% of their income, and hit financial independence so that they could pursue their dreams and not be owned by stuff, not be owned by the need for more, not be owned by their lifestyle creep. They wanted to own their future and work because they wanted to, not because they had to. And they didn't want to be constrained by how others defined their happiness. And I found the movie to be very interesting and very inspiring. However, the way that they used the 4% rule did not discuss how safe withdrawal rates expose you to risk and how sensitive safe withdrawal rates and your risk can be. For example, what I have here are the survival results that I had for flat safe withdrawal rates in my study. I explained this study in depth and all the assumptions that go into building it in episode 36. And if you're going to take any of these numbers with something more than a grain of salt, I highly recommend that you go back to that episode, listen to it, and understand what went into the study so that you know how you can educationally apply these numbers to understanding your financial future. With that being said, what I have here are the numbers that represent a 30-year retirement, given different portfolio mixes from a 100% bond index fund all the way up to a 100% stock index fund, and a few mixes in between. I also have safe withdrawal rates that I studied everywhere from 2.8% all the way up to 6%. Now, my actual study results cover more, but I wanted to hone in on the 4% rule here. This, again, was for a 30-year retirement, and the numbers represent the number of times the Monte Carlo simulation in my study made it to the end of retirement with money left over. Our biggest fear, if we're going to take our initial nest egg, establish an income, correct that income for inflation so that we can have perpetual buying power moving forward. If we're going to take that approach for safe withdrawal rates, we need to understand that it's possible, depending on how things are invested, depending on the volatility of the market, and depending specifically on when we get involved in investing and retirement, sequence risk, in other words. All of that plays into how likely we are to make it to the end without running out of money. And what we see here is if you're withdrawing 4% for 30 years and you are all in bonds, you have an 80% chance of making it to the end of your retirement. And that's okay. But that means 1 in 5 people who follow that strategy are going to end up running out of money before the end of their life. On the other extreme end, on a 100% stock portfolio, we have an 89.8%, basically 90% survival rate, which means 1 in 10 of the people who follow the 4% rule for 30 years are going to run out of money. The best option here was actually 80% bonds, 20% stocks. You get 96.1% success. And I think that is a complete and total win. The 5% on a Monte Carlo simulation on the best end and the worst end, they arguably aren't going to happen, because in an extreme case where the market ends up doing the outside 5%, well, we're probably not as worried about retirement accounts at that point. Society would have been pretty far collapsed. So 96.1%, that's a win. I would jump on that plane any day. For the 50-50 bonds and stocks, 95.2, same thing. I would jump on that plane any day if I were just worried about a consistent withdrawal rate through 30 years of retirement without any deviation. Now, I know that may not be realistic, and you might say, well, that works in a vacuum. But what this does is it gives us a boundary. We know that if we ever took out more than 4% in a given year, especially early on in retirement, we're exposing ourselves to more risk than what's on here. But if we stay on 4% or below, we know we're not exceeding that risk. And if we're pursuing other forms of income, as many people in the FIRE community do, we know that we are going to be better off than the withdrawal rate that we're also leaning on if income doesn't work out from another source. But if you're involved in FIRE, you want to retire much earlier. You probably want to retire by age 30 or age 40. So you're probably looking at numbers that are more like this. These are my results for a nest egg for a 60-year retirement. Now, before I dig into those, I want to explain that, sure, you can have a 2-step retirement. You can make a bridge account that's a non-retirement account and get it to a point where it can survive for 30 years for you. And you probably keep it invested so that you can stretch it through the full of the 30 years. But then, on the other side of that, you have another account, be it Roth or traditionally invested 401ks or IRAs, where you can draw from that nest egg for the next 30-odd some years, depending on your specific plan. So you could look at the 30-year survival numbers and play that game twice. You can play that game once, getting to a point where you know your retirement tax-sheltered accounts are going to get you to a point at age 60 that you can have a successful retirement in retirement age without running out of money. And you can have a bridge account that you invest in thereafter to help push your retirement age back closer to where you are today. And you can treat them as 2 separate entities because you can only pull from one, then pull from the other. However, if you wanted to build just one nest egg and have it last you the whole of the 60 years, we got to look at numbers like these. And what we find here is the 4% rule does not do very well for us. At best, it doesn't even make it to an 80% success rate on the 30% bond, 70% stock portfolio mix. That mix is the one that did the best out of all of them. The 80% bond, 20% stock is a 50-50 shot of survival or not. It is a coin flip, whether or not you run out of money or you make it to the end of 60 years. I would consider that a very bad choice. Speaking of bad choices, if you were only invested in bonds and you didn't have any stocks in the portfolios here in the confines of my study, the best you could do at a 2.8% withdrawal rate is a 50-50 coin flip. There are only 2 portfolios that actually make it to a 95% or better success rate, and that's going to be the 80% bond, 20% stock, and the 50-50 mix at a 2.8% withdrawal rate, less than 3%, mind you. And that's what gets you above 95%. Now, you can get close to 95%. Technically, the 50-50 stock bond mix gets you to 94.3% in my study with a 3% withdrawal rate. In the 30% bond, 70% stock is 94.7% successful at a 2.8% withdrawal rate. But everything else falls into an exposure to risk, and depending on your risk tolerance and your propensity for other sources of income, probably undue risk. If you listen to audio only, I would encourage you to go find the video on YouTube or Rumble for this episode of the podcast so you could see the rest of the numbers. I didn't read through them all because that would become boring. But if you're a nerd like me, you like looking at tables that are color-coded and represent beautiful numbers. In conclusion, if you are pursuing FIRE and you don't want to split up your strategy into a tax-advantaged retirement future and a bridge account future now where you're in a taxable brokerage account, well, you're going to need to consider a very, very conservative safe withdrawal rate in order to get you through the rest of your life. And that assumes a very rigid adherence to those rules. It also assumes that you're not going to run into a major life change, such as if you started with FIRE when you were single, you get married or have children or have a house burned down. Something big in your life can change and shift things radically. We don't have a crystal ball where we can predict the future. What we can do, though, is understand when we set out on a plan, if it's one that we can actually stick with. I really want those who are in the FIRE community pursuing the goal to work when they want to, not because they have to. I want to help them pursue that goal, especially if the work that they want to do doesn't generate an income. Goodness, one of the big passions that I have in the answer to that question is homeschooling my kids. Nobody's going to pay me to do that. And if you set up a plan where you don't want to go back to work, you don't want to end up losing your financial independence, it's important that you understand the risks there within associated with your plan and not take the 4% rule as the perfect end-all, be-all gospel. The 4% rule was developed with a 20 to 30-year time horizon with a particular stock bond mix. It wasn't designed to last you into perpetuity. A perpetual safe withdrawal rate is going to be much more conservative. To wrap things up, if you're a member of the FIRE community, I'd love to hear your feedback on this episode and hear what you think of the risks in the study that I presented here. I know that a common response is going to be, well, I plan on doing something. The thing that I want to do, if I don't have to earn money for a living, it's going to generate some sort of money. So I don't have to fully depend on those investments. But at the same time, that doesn't apply to everybody. So I think in the community as a whole, it's still important to understand these risks. And I want to know how much of a conversation there is within the FIRE community about this. And if there are questions out there that I can answer in a future episode, I would love to receive those from you, either in the comments section or at HopeFilledFinancial.com. With that, until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your HopeFilled financial future.